Well, and that's the sad part about this whole thing, right? Is why are some questions untouchable? Why are they not to be asked? Why, if you were to ask those questions, would that then put you on the outside, right?
All right, Bill, here we go. Episode 5 of the You've Heard It Said podcast.
Welcome back, Jared.
Yeah, welcome back, Bill. All
We've
right,
made it
I
through.
realize, we've made it through a couple episodes. We've got some clarification to do at this point for anybody that's still listening. In the title, we were pretty clear that we call it a happy hour podcast, but we haven't really explained what's going on with that title.
What
or
exactly
why
does
we
that
called it.
mean, Jared? What'd you put that in there?
Yeah, put all the onus on me. Well, so here's the history behind it. Bill and I, we used to Zoom once a month together or so, and we eventually turned it into a happy hour Zoom where each of us would kind of make a cocktail before we sat down to do our Zoom. And so that tradition carries forward into these podcasts. So it truly is a happy hour podcast because we come prepared.
Absolutely. And you were actually being very generous when you said a cocktail, because it was technically a cocktail or two. But
Okay, that's fair. So I should be honest. What am I drinking this evening? I'm actually having a mistletoe margarita, which was something
you're
we
gonna have
got
to
for
explain
Christmas.
that one. Explain that one.
It was a Christmas cocktail we got for when we had family over and stuff, but it never got open. So here we are, like mid-January, and I'm like, oh, I should drink that. So that's what I'm drinking tonight is mistletoe margarita. How about you, Bill?
Yeah, and just so most of you know that I'm a purist, so I'm just drinking ice water. I just do this with Jared to make him feel better. No, that's not true. So actually, if you were to ask me about a particular cocktail, probably 90% of the ones I would mention would be margaritas. So I'm on board with Jared's margarita, but mine happens to be strawberry. But for those of you that don't know, I live in Tennessee, which is kind of a prime moonshine state. So you mix a little bit of lemon moonshine in with it, and it makes it its own drink. So it's very good. Very good. So
nice. And so we do actually, we should tell our listeners, we record our podcasts in one sitting. Sometimes we record multiple sessions. And so if you ever feel like one session's not quite on track as others, it may have been later in the evening. And we'll just leave it up to the listeners to discern where they're at in that process. But again, we've never claimed for this podcast to be a super reverent, sanctified podcast. This is more of an irreverent. Right.
Well, the good thing about it is, as the evening goes on, we have a tendency to get more transparent. So,
well, that's true. That's true.
That's a good way to say what we're doing. So anyway, hey, so we, introduced why we did this podcast. We introduced topics that we wanted to cover on this podcast. And so tonight we picked the first podcast subject, which is the one you introduced, don't get fired. So what exactly does that mean, Jared?
Yeah, so the don't get fired phrase came from the very first time I divulged to another pastor friend, hey, I think I'm starting a podcast. It's kind of this idea I've been having. And the first thing he says to me is, don't get fired. And he meant it wholeheartedly, that could be a possibility. And so that's a very real reality for any pastor that wants to talk about their faith or ask questions about what they believe and what they teach. And it's kind of unique to the profession that we have to worry about what we question and what we think and what we might wonder about things. And so that's where we're going to start tonight on not getting fired. What are the topics that might get me fired? And what can we say and not say?
Well, and that's the sad part about this whole thing, right? Is why are some questions untouchable? Why are they not to be asked? Why, if you were to ask those questions, would that then put you on the outside, right? Whether you're premillennial or postmillennial, that's not going to get you fired, right? That's something that's open to discussion. But if you believe that women potentially can be senior pastors, or whether you think that women are not supposed to be in that position and are supposed to be seated and not heard, that could potentially get you out. And so we've Jared and I were talking and have come up with a number of topics that, at least in the evangelical community and potentially in the denomination that he's under, could lead to you being asked to leave, and has happened to other people who've done so.
Yes, that is exactly right, Bill. And in my own journey of ministry, I've had moments where the question itself, it seems like it's never the issue, but if you have the wrong answer,
Yeah,
or
good
you
point.
answer you answer in a way that the powers to be don't think you is the right answer, it could cause some real problems. On one hand, I think I can somewhat understand this, the need for a level, a degree of orthodoxy of theology that is grounded. But on the other hand, I think, gosh, we need to have some room to be able to wrestle with things that are difficult. And I guess the hardest part for me is the longer I'm a Christian, the more I realize there is to wrestle with.
That's
And
absolutely
so,
true.
yeah. So what's this list you came up with? Let's look at some of these. What are the topics that could get you fired for doing a podcast about?
Well, we mentioned LGBTQ affirmation, so that's certainly top, and one that still goes on today. Inerrancy, which we can just call it inerrancy right now, but probably deserves a little more of an explanation in terms of what we're actually talking about. Third topic we brought up, referred to as Christian nationalism, but honestly, it's, was Jesus a Republican or a Democrat? That's kind of what we need to decide. Fourth, women in church leadership, which is really kind of a big thing, has impacted a lot of people. Hell, salvation, and exclusivity. Why don't you explain that one a little bit?
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm just looking at the list you sent me. So there are a lot of different viewpoints on the details of hell and the afterlife. There's I know good pastors who don't believe in hell
Hmm.
at all.
Are they
And
really good pastors then, Jared? I mean,
well, again, depends who you're asking, what circles
that's
you're in.
right. That's right.
But then what you teach about the afterlife matters a lot
Right.
to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something that can get you in hot water really quickly, depending on how you approach it.
Talk about deconstruction and doubt, but really that's kind of the whole topic of our podcast.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to examine. So hopefully you won't get into trouble for that. Just so everyone knows, I'm retired, so I don't have a lot to lose. Jared's got a lot more on the line than I do. And, one of the last ones we talked about was interfaith openness and, being more inclusive in terms of our involvement with other faiths that are non-Christian, potentially Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist. So anyway, we hope to touch on some of these going forward on this podcast. That's kind of the topic, the issues that are potentially going to get someone kicked out, depending on the stance, or as Jared said, the answers people make to these questions. But I guess what we're asking is, why can't we discuss this and not be in fear or of risking our position or our relationship with those other people in our church?
All right. Well, let's dive right in then. Bill. The LGBTQ topic is a big one. Why do you think it matters to so many people, and why do you think the church has made it such a huge priority that it's literally the top of our list? Like, if you don't believe the right things about this, you're gone. What are your thoughts on that, Bill?
So I think a lot of that stems from, I think most people would believe that Paul made it black and white in his statements in the New Testament. And then you could even bring up, there's technically three references in the Old Testament and three references in the New Testament. The ones in the New Testament have to do with Paul's statement about same sex, men giving up their desire for women and seeking same sex relationships. Paul speaks pretty specifically about that. The Old Testament talks about homosexuality as well. And so a lot of people will grab onto that and want to make it apply to our culture. And I think a
So
lot.
hang on. You think the main reason that this is such an issue is because people misunderstand Paul? Or they're that vehement about their biblical position? Because I don't know, Bill. Honestly, I think for most of the groups that are so ornery about this, it has nothing to do with their hermeneutic. Like, they're not going, "Oh, I'm so passionate about this interpretation in the Bible." I think it just is cultural. Honestly, I just think it's an us versus them issue. And I think it's become a way of defining whole denominations, churches, peoples about whether you're base, whether you're in the right camp or not. I don't think they're like sitting around deeply reading the scripture. I don't know. That's my own like I'm trying to understand why this issue is number one. You know what I mean?
Well, Jared, you're dead wrong.
Wouldn't be the first time, Bill.
I think it's three very short things that Paul mentions in the New Testament. People build a theology on that, want to apply to it. And I think that if you cross that line and want to say, hey, LGBTQ is okay today, people are saying you're letting the world pollute what is true religion and what is true righteousness. And honestly, a lot of the things that we want to talk about have to do with more contemporary thought on some of these issues. And so the argument, I think, for many conservative Christians is that what we've done is we've allowed the world to pollute our beliefs and that we're letting that happen and we're actually taking away from our Christian foundation. I think a lot of, what people believe about the LGBTQ in terms of wanting okay, I will be the first to admit so I'm not gay, have been married for 40 plus years. I'm not a closet gay. I think women are beautiful. And so I have no desire for same sex. And because of that, I have no understanding for that desire, right? I mean, it's completely contrary to who I am. I couldn't explain it or defend it because I don't experience it. And I think it's easy for a majority of people in the Christian church who have not experienced that same sex attraction to then easily dismiss it as being something that is deviant because it's contrary to what they feel or their attraction. So I think part of it is just how some of us are wired and how we feel. And so then I think we look for biblical evidence to support that thought and then say, oh, this is wrong. Paul said it very clearly. And so that people who do have a same-sex attraction, there's something wrong with them. It's not anything that's wrong with us. And so I think that the biblical backup for some of these beliefs is used to defend what many people already believe.
Yeah, okay, Bill. I'm rolling with you here. I just feel like the cultural influence is still so strong. Like I don't think that the evangelical church would have such a passionate response against anything LGBTQ if the culture, our current Western American culture, wasn't making this such a mainline issue. In other words, I think our response is very reactive to what the culture around us is doing, rather than being one of like, oh, we have this deep conviction for the New Testament scriptures and we read Paul, and because we see Paul's argument here, we're going to be passionately against this. I'm just not convinced that's what's happening. Instead I see, honestly, within our culture, the LGBTQ issue is the modern day civil rights movement. That's how I see it. We are defending the rights of the oppressed. And I see a lot of rhetoric, both politically, culturally, kind of saying like, we have to champion the rights of LGBTQ. And it's such a strong political push that those who don't agree are driven to places of really extreme rhetoric themselves in response to passionate drive of those who want to support LGBTQ positions. So, like, for example, one of the things I've noticed with young people, even those who like you wouldn't say that they have ever had same-sex attraction, they have friends who do. And when you are telling them that their friend can't fully express themselves the way that they were designed to, the way that they feel inclined to, they take it upon themselves. Like they feel personally offended that you have told their friend what they can or can't believe. So that issue becomes adopted to themselves. And I just think that the church's response is reactive rather than biblically driven. And I don't know, maybe I'm off on that.
Well, I mean, but then you have the other argument that the Bible says that they weren't designed that way, right? And the argument that the church wants to put forth is that people were designed that male was for female. And that's, when you had mentioned that young people feel like that same-sex attraction was how they were designed, people would argue that the Bible says, no, that's not how people were designed. People were designed that male and female were to be attracted to one another. The other thing is in terms of the church being resistant to what the culture's introducing. The culture's introduced a lot besides LGBTQ, like, for example, driving a new Audi or getting the latest Tesla or, having a beach house. And the church doesn't seem to be as resistant to that as they are to episodes of sitcoms or something where there's a gay person or talk show hosts or things like that. And so I think the church feels like that the media is eroding away the Christian foundation and contaminating what they believe to be truth. And to kind of us, so you and I disagree in terms of maybe where it comes from, right? But the argument that I would make is that I think that the LGBTQ issue is very cultural, and that what's interesting, if we talk about it, Jesus never says a word about it. And if Jesus is the one that we're following, why didn't he bring it up? It was certainly going on in his day, certainly within the Roman culture, and Paul witnessed it in the Greek culture, and yet Jesus, for whatever reason, never mentioned it. Why? Why is that? Why is that? I shouldn't say he never mentioned it because we don't know that for a fact. But we can say that those people that recorded Jesus' words, that wasn't included.
Right. There's no Sermon on the Mount dealing with
Right.
homosexuality.
Right.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm with you here to a point, Bill. I do think it's cultural. I think it was, you look at Paul and when he's talking to the Corinthians, he had a lot to say about sexuality, because their church was dealing with it. But obviously it wasn't as prevalent of an issue in the entire New Testament world to where Jesus ended up talking about it as much. I mean, he was talking about money and faith and Pharisees and religiosity and all these other things. So bringing that back to our culture, I mean, obviously it's become, like you said, a cultural hot point, and I think we're in agreement there. The part that perplexes me in both your argument and in how the church handles this is there's things that are obviously not biblical that are happening in our culture that seem to get far less press by the church. Divorce is a great example. Obesity would be another, right? But let's stick with divorce because we're dealing with relational and sexual issues. So divorce rate's like over 50% in the US. Nobody cares. Like, it's not, you don't see people flying banners for this. You don't see people having huge, like, passionate Facebook posts about this. It's just like regularly accepted, It's just it's not a thing. So what is it about the LGBTQ issue that seems to make it more elevated, more important, more of a central issue, and yet divorce is kind of downplayed? It's not even really talked about. I don't understand. They're both not biblical if you want to be super biblical about it. And so I that just makes me wonder, like, is there another agenda here? Is there another reason why this issue is so passionate? And then to bring it all home again, the whole point we're talking about it is these are things that could actually get pastor fired if they don't have the right viewpoint on LGBTQ. Like, they're out instantly, gone. So again, let's take those two issues, right? Let's say a pastor condoned a divorce that was not biblical. They're far less likely to get fired than a pastor who condoned a homosexual relationship that they shouldn't have.
So
And yet,
let's go beyond a theoretical situation so we
yeah,
can look at what happened at World Vision, right? World Vision came out and made a statement that they would be hiring people who were self-proclaimed LGBTQ, were in a monogamous relationship with someone else, and that they would employ them, right? They weren't in a leadership position,
when was this, Bill? Like 10 years ago or so? I
something like
vaguely
that.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like
And
early
when word
2000s.
got out that they publicly made that announcement, Franklin Graham and a number of other people came out and not only condemned World Vision for allowing them to be employees at World Vision, but then threatened to say we should take away our support for all the children that World Vision provides just basic needs for. And if World Vision didn't bend to what they wanted, that they would then stop supporting the children. I mean, what group of faith-based, Jesus-loving people would use children as a pawn to get what they wanted, right? All because World Vision said they were going to hire them as employees, not that they were promoting an LGBTQ agenda. They were just going to be on their payroll. This is the church's response. And not only Franklin Graham, but I know that the local pastor of the church that I was attending also was very outspoken and supported using children as a negotiating issue. And World Vision, within a matter of days, bended and said they would no longer do that.
They recanted on their policy.
Yep.
So this is, yeah, that's a good, I think that's a good case study here, Bill. And as far as the topic at hand, like, why would we get fired over these things? And I just, if I could speak to the evangelical church and the leadership, like if I was somehow magically in charge of it all, I would just ask them for more patience. Honestly, I think each case we have to remember there are real people and real relationships, and it's I just don't think we can be dogmatic when it comes to how we speak about LGBTQ, how we handle it both culturally and personally, both as pastors and as family members and as followers of Christ. If we reduce the real life experiences of people who are wrestling through these attractional issues down to policy and religiosity, I don't think we honor Christ, and we risk getting fired.
I think you do risk getting fired. And the reality is, I think for pastors, you could ask yourself, what if you're wrong? What if the stance you're taking based on what Paul talked about, which in my mind is highly cultural, what if you're wrong? So then the thing is do you want to err on the side of judgment and condemnation, or do you want to err on the side of love and encouragement? Which side did Jesus proclaim throughout his time here?
Well, and that's the struggle, though, Bill. I mean, I want to do both, and I just need freedom. I think as a follower of Jesus and as a pastor to prayerfully walk through those decisions in an effort to do both and be faithful to the scripture, uphold what is true and right, and yet at the same time do so with grace and love. So like why is my job even in jeopardy just for talking about this? If I hit send on this podcast out into the world, my job's already in jeopardy just for having this conversation. And I don't think that's healthy.
I agree. I agree that the church has made it so that you can't even ask or discuss certain issues or ask questions.
But that's why we have this podcast. So here we are, and we're doing it. Bill, we're 30 minutes in, so I think we should bring this one to a close, but we're going to continue it right into next week, where we keep talking about the topics that might get me fired.
Right. I've got nothing to lose.
So you're safe over there, Mr. Retired.
That's right.
But to our listeners, we hope you join us again next week on another exciting episode of the You've Heard It Said podcast, where we talk about the risky things, why the church does what it does, what it means to follow Christ in these crazy modern times. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Adios.